So in our lecture on federal regulation, we're actually going to mix it up a little bit. We usually start with the legislative branch. That's what's first in the Constitution. But today we're going to start with the executive branch because what the executive branch does will give you some context to what Congress does when we get to that section. So let's look at the executive branch, shall we? Now again, remember, everything starts with the Constitution. And this is where the primary place that the executive branch is going to get its authority to do anything. So if you recall, it was Article 2 that established the executive branch. And it said two words, that the executive has the power to faithfully execute the laws passed by Congress. Faithfully execute. From there, we draw the executive power. There's not a lot more detail than that, but we have fleshed this system out. So the president is granted authority to execute the laws that are passed by Congress, and that authority comes directly from the Constitution. But the president can also get authority, and the executive branch can also get authority delegated from Congress. So Congress is granted its authority from the Constitution as well, and it can pass some of that responsibility over to the executive branch. And it will usually do this by way of creating an agency. So I'll give you an example. When Congress passed the Environmental Protection Act, it also created the Environmental Protection Agency to develop the specific rules to enforce and implement that act. But let's take a look at the organization of the executive branch. So the executive branch includes the president at the very top. The president is the leader of the country, but also specifically the leader of our executive branch. And underneath the president, there are departments that are part of the White House organization, including the Department of Transportation, the Department of Education. And each of those departments is responsible for implementing the president's goals. And each of those departments also has a leader called the secretary, which is appointed by the president. And the secretary of all of those 15 departments together form what we call the cabinet, a group of advisors to the president. In addition to these departments that are headed and part of the executive branch, we have federal agencies. For an example, I told you about the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. The agencies are under the responsibility and management of the executive branch, but they're actually created by Congress to issue regulations to enforce the laws passed by Congress. So again, the example I gave you was Congress passed the Environmental Protection Act, and with that created the Environmental Protection Agency to pass the very specific rules, and then handed that agency over to the president to administer. Now, regulations are detailed rules that ensure laws are effectively implemented, because laws are big and broad, and they can last for decades, and things change across the years. So we pass specific rules, one, to get the level of detail needed to implement the law, but also, although we'll learn there is a specific process for changing rules, it is far easier to change a rule than it is to go back and change a law. Congress, a little by design, moves slowly, but the administrative aspect of the executive branch can move a lot quicker. Next, we'll talk about the role of federal agencies.